Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome back to the Atlasfanfic channel. Today I'm back with part 4 of What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as an Uzumaki. Let the tale begin. Chapter 18. When I wasn't working, I realized that the hospital was boring. I had no qualms about abusing my abilities in medical ninjutsu, and instead of shifting when my arm fell asleep from the weight of Kushina's head, I used a bit to restore circulation and ease the stiffness of remaining in one position for an extended period of time. That quickly turned into a chakra control exercise when I realized how hard it was to alleviate stiffness without movement. Not only did I have to maximize blood flow, but I also had to manipulate lymphatic fluids without turning my body into a giant cramp, which was damn near impossible considering lymph was everywhere while blood stayed on specific paths. While I practiced, the hospital lights gradually dimmed for the night. Minato's sedative wore off a few hours after midnight. Sometime before then and after our conversation, Jiraiya had fallen asleep, leaving me in my silent, selfish vigil. I waited until Minato finally opened his eyes in the dim light before sliding out from beneath Kushina. She stirred slightly as I propped her against the back of the chair, but I was glad she was still a heavy sleeper. "Nisan?" Minato asked as I leaned over him, sliding my hand into his. "It's me, Minato-kun. How are you feeling?" "Throat hurts." "Do you want me to get some pain medication for you?" "Conscious?" "No, you won't stay conscious." "Ninjutsu?" "Sorry, kiddo, you're healing the long way this time." "Kushina?" "She's right here." "She's just fine, I'm fine, everyone's fine." "Time?" "Middle of the night." "You've been out for a bit more than a day, and a portion of that was spent in surgery." He relaxed. "Can you wiggle your fingers and toes for me?" When I saw his toes move under the blanket and his hand squeeze mine, I relaxed as well. "Good job. Are you sure you don't want me to get some anesthetic?" "No medicine. For now." I felt his forehead, which was still feverish. "Think you can eat and drink something?" "Just water." "It's both or I put you back under, Minato-kun." "Chest hurts." "I'm sure it does." "A kunai through the heart will do that to you." "Sit tight for a few minutes and I'll be back, don't move or I knock you out and you'll wake up strapped down." I didn't mean the threat, but he probably shouldn't have been awake for another day at least. I hurried to the small kitchen open during the night and grabbed a small package of the first thing my hand landed on. It was a bit difficult to blindly fish out a spoon and straw as well as fill a glass of water without making a mess or a bunch of noise, but I managed. When I returned, Jiraiya was somehow still asleep, as was Kushina. As gently as I could, I inclined the bed just enough so Minato could eat with some kind of normalcy and not choke on his water. "Thank you," he murmured as I folded his weakly trembling hands around the glass and guided it to his mouth. I turned away to straighten Kushina's neck so she wouldn't wake up with a cramp. When I looked back at Minato, he had finished the glass. "Take it easy, Minato-kun, you haven't had anything in your stomach for a while. I brought you some kind of food. It was dark so I'm not exactly sure if it's mashed bananas or applesauce." Minato made a face. "I'm pretty sure it's applesauce. The bananas are generally kept on the top shelf." I opened the half-cup container and placed it in Minato's hand and the spoon in the other. He clumsily took a bite. "Definitely applesauce," he informed me. "See? I always grab the good stuff." The good stuff would have been ramen. I didn't bother arguing with him, he never had the joys of pizza. My infrequent attempts to make it hadn't been very successful, considering half of the ingredients just didn't seem to exist and I couldn't remember the exact recipe. Word to the wise, garlic and ginger were certainly not the same thing and could not be substituted for each other. I did make pancakes on a semi-regular basis, but without thick, maple syrup, they never tasted right. At least eggs were a thing. While Minato ate, I refilled his glass with water. When he finished the small meal and the second glass of water, I left to quickly wash them. When I returned, Jiraiya was finally waking up, albeit slowly. Tipping Minato's chart at an awkward angle to catch enough light to write by, I scribbled down the pertinent information. "Is there someone else here?" Minato asked when I returned to his side. "Yes, Jiraiya is on your other side while Inoichi-san and Shikaku-san are both injured and unconscious behind me." "I can't sense." "You're barely lucid enough to communicate, take it easy. Your sensing is going to be shot until you're taken off the pain meds." "I don't want." "Trust me, enjoy being a genin. There is almost no pain control on the lines." Jiraiya finally sat up and put a hand on Minato's shoulder. The boy flinched away before he recognized his teacher and his face lit up. "Sensei. You're back." "Yeah, Gaki. How are you feeling?" "Nisan just asked me that." "I was asleep, so I missed it." While they started to argue, I went to wake up Kushina. I thought she was happy to interact with Minato, but it was difficult to tell while she looked like she was about to burst into tears at any provocation, even though she sat on the bed beside him and fussed over him. I sat in the chair and hovered in a state between sleep and meditation, monitoring the conversation just enough to stop any stressors if need be. "Kichiro says that all the time," Kushina murmured, and I heard her lay down. "Quiet! He'll hear you," Minato answered. Their voices lowered to the point I could barely make out who was speaking, much less what they were saying. I wondered what about me could be so interesting that they would need to be so secretive. It made me slightly paranoid, but I shoved away the feeling and resisted the urge to eavesdrop, eventually landing in my own mindscape, a few inches from the Kyuubi's snout. I swore and jerked backwards. "Go away. It's my head. What do you want?" "Pizza." "Bless you. Pizza is food." "Why are you here?" "Because I enjoy your company." "I'm flattered. You got my company, now go away. You need to learn to be polite. I have no need to abide by your human customs." I rolled my eyes. "Then I'll call you Muffin and you can't get mad at me." The Kyuubi growled in warning. "Right, you need to learn to be polite. As much as they are unnecessary, I do know the proper conduct of you humans." "Really?" I rolled my eyes. "Show me." I bowed. "Hello, my name is Kichiro." "Nice to meet you, Kichiro-chan." "My name is Kurama." "Nice to meet you, Kurama-sama," I responded by pure reflex, stunned. I never expected him to share his name with me. Do not share that name with anyone. Understood. There are humans attempting to get your attention. Leave. Instead of unceremoniously throwing me out like he did the last time, Kurama let me wake myself up from my meditation. I came back to my body to find Jiraiya shaking my shoulder. "You alright, Gaki?" "Yeah, I'm fine. What's wrong?" I asked. "You weren't paying attention," he deadpanned. "I was meditating, isn't that the point?" Jiraiya pointed towards the window where a messenger hawk was perched on the windowsill and his hand was bleeding. I stood up and held out my arm to the bird. I was more than a little disturbed by the hawk's gaze. It held still while I detached the tightly furled page from its leg. As soon as the message was free, the hawk took off, circled the room, and flew out the window. Shaking out my arm, I sat back down and opened the black paper, confused. Only Jonin and team leaders generally received messages via hawk. I was neither of those. Straight face. Wartime mission summons. Rank S. Issue to Uzumaki Kichiro 007309. Reporting time 10 minutes from reception of orders. Briefing place, Hokage Tower. Type, infiltration, village services, combat. Teammates, Kato Dan, Orochimaru. Please arrive prepared for departure. Authorized by Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandame Hokage. Straight face. I'd never even seen summons before, much less received an S-ranked one, though Sakumo had taught me how to determine if they were legitimate. I did know one thing: there would be absolutely no way I'd be working with Orochimaru. The paper slipped from my hands and landed between my feet. "Nisan?" Kushina asked. A moment later, she stumbled off the bed and fell to her knees beside me, snatching up the page. Before she could look at it, Jiraiya plucked it out of her hand and incinerated it while Kushina leapt up, her protest dying on her lips. "Their mission summons," he explained. "They should only be seen by the recipient. You have 9 minutes to report, Kichiro-kun." Minato stumbled off the bed and clung tightly to Kushina's arm for support. Thankfully, I was one of the few people in the hospital who regularly used IVs in patients. Minato was stable enough not to be attached to oxygen, and heart monitors didn't exist yet, so he wasn't attached to anything that would cause problems. I stood up and faced them. This world didn't have treatments for PTSD, no one but me could do anything for them. Every second I was gone left them suffering from something they didn't understand. I was completely willing to ignore the orders, to take them and hide if I had to, damn the consequences, but I knew if I did, my absence on the mission I knew was waiting for me would set Kumo up to continue the war or declare war on Konoha in the future, causing far more harm to far more people than just the 2 children in front of me. I didn't even have time to tell them why. When I glanced between them, I could see they knew I had to abandon them. I could see the hurt, pain, and fear in their faces. "God help me," I pleaded, but no one else could understand English. I chose my next words to the 2 of them carefully. "I'm so sorry," my voice begging. "I'm sorry. I don't have any excuse. I don't have any justification. I'm so sorry." My words failed. Slowly and deliberately, I sank into a traditional seiza and bowed, pressing my forehead against the ground. Kushina started to reach for me, but without her support Minato would have fallen. I completed the bow and stood up. "I'll come be back, I promise." Before they could recover from their stunned silence, I leapt onto the windowsill and dashed away across the rooftops. I had 6 minutes left to replace all my mission supplies, accepting my weapons, and make it to the Hokage Tower. "Urgent mission!" I exclaimed as I swung into the first shinobi shop I laid eyes on. It was still too early for the normal pre-mission preparations to begin for the day. I started to rattle off the things I needed. It would have taken 10 minutes for a civilian to have gotten the things together, but since the shop owner was a former kunoichi, she managed to haphazardly toss everything in a pack small enough for me to easily fight while carrying in half that time. "Come back alive, Uzumaki-san," she said while pushing it over the counter. "She get payment from my account using the village credit system." "I will," I promised and took off with a minute left to reach the Hokage Tower. When I landed in front of the tower exactly a minute later, an ANBU materialized in front of me, and I barely managed to stick enough chakra into my feet to come to a dead stop. "Basement, 1 minute," the ANBU stated without inflection, then stepped out of my way. I was glad I chose to run to the Hokage Tower instead of attempting a shunshin. My shunshin was extremely uncontrolled and not worth the ensuing collisions or the reprimands for using a jutsu forbidden so close to the Hokage Tower. I took a deep breath and stepped inside the tower, walking quickly. Once I reached the stairs down, I decided on going down the stairs the shinobi way, since it would take me a good 5 minutes otherwise. The first 3 flights were like normal stairs, zigzagging back and forth. Beyond that, it was a spiral staircase. Angling myself just right, I bounced off the walls and made it down the regular flights before pausing at the top of the spiral staircase. After a few seconds of deliberation, I jumped up and attached my hands to the ceiling and swung down like I would play on monkey bars. A full-size adult wouldn't have enough room to generate the force necessary to zip down the stairs faster than terminal velocity, at least not without getting their knees scraped off by the stone wall. If it was under any other circumstances, I would have hooped. The adrenaline rush of such a fall was amazing. Unfortunately, like all falls, controlled or not, they didn't last forever. When I was suddenly flying straight, I swore an alarm and collided with someone. Hard. Luckily, whomever it was knew I was coming and neither of us went splat. I knew you were mad about that sleeping jutsu, but I didn't expect attempted murder, smart aleck, someone wheezed as I took a shaky step back. Sorry, Danny boy, I muttered, looking up at the man in front of me. Pale blue hair obscured his face as he doubled over, but I recognized Kato Dan anyways. He made a face at the name. Well, you're on time at least, so head on into the office, the Hokage is waiting for you. I glanced around the hall to see a much younger and less creepy-looking, though obviously irritated, Orochimaru watching me. What? Did one of your experiments go bad or something? I snapped at him, probably a bit more aggressive than was strictly necessary, though the way his face went completely blank on the turn of a dime made me a little nervous. It was enough proof for me that he was at least partially behind the disappearance of the Uzumaki child from the orphanage, not that I had any way to pursue the lead. Kichiro, Dan snapped. The Hokage wants to see you. He steered me into a bare room where the Hokage paced impatiently. You're late. The man barked and closed the door behind me, leaving Orochimaru and Dan in the hall. My little sister is showing obvious signs of PTSD, so you can go screw your complaints because I'm pretty sure Minato has the exact same thing and no one else can help them. You're lucky I'm here at all. You're needed most on this mission. If it wasn't for the fact that people would die if the Hachibi isn't sealed securely, I wouldn't be. He decided to ignore my disrespect. I've worked out the details with the Raikage. Since you will be the main component of this mission and the primary operative, I'm putting you in joint leadership of a team. You are to respect their input. I will not, under any circumstances, work with Orochimaru. The Hokage's gaze sharpened as I crossed my arms defiantly. Why? You won't believe me or even hear me out if I tell you, nor do I have evidence. Still, I will not work with Orochimaru. You and a single Jonin are not strong enough to control a Jinchuriki. I don't care. I will not work with Orochimaru. There are no other Jonin available with the skill set necessary. I don't care. The Hokage hopped in frustration. If not Orochimaru, then name another. Sakumo. He's out of the village on a mission. Kagami. Also out of the village. Tsunade. You're one of our best medics, I can't risk another on this mission as well. I racked my brain for names of people I knew from this time. Uchiha Fugaku. That boy is barely a Chunin, he would be a liability at best considering Kumo's interest in dojutsus. Inazuka Jiro. Out of the village. Shimizu Arata. Left the village last night. Kato-san's shadow clone. Please take this seriously. The Nara clan specializes in long-range jutsu like Kato-san, what about one of their Jonin? Only one of the Nara currently in the village is a ninja and he is currently incapacitated and still a Jinin. What about one of the other Uchiha? The Uchiha are a clan of frontline fighters, the average time their Jonin spend in the village during wartime is about 10 hours, again, Kumo has invested an interest in dojutsus. If all of these Jonin are fighting then who's protecting the village? The ANBU are guarding the walls alongside several Chunin. Jinin conduct patrols, most without a Jonin leader. So you're saying that this village is practically begging to be attacked. No wonder Suna managed to get inside and conduct a torture session. Will you stop rubbing that failure in my face? He shouted. Kushina, and probably Minato as well, are mentally ill because of that failure. I can help them, I can fix them, and instead, I'm here ending a war and helping to prevent another one from beginning. I shouted right back. I could tell anyone with a basic understanding of Fuinjutsu how to use the seal and be back where I should be in less than an hour. If the village is in such a dire strait that every single jonin is needed on the lines, then Jiraiya won't be able to stay with them, and those two children are going to be forced to deal with problems that reduce the strongest of adults to paranoid, homeless, beggars who can't even take care of themselves. Do you think I want to let them suffer? My own child is in his third surgery right now after being caught in the crossfire of one of my fights. If the comfort of 3 children are the price, I have to pay it to ensure thousands more children stay alive and healthy and out of another war. He responded, pacing. Minato is a once-in-a-century genius who will probably make full jonin before he turns 16. Kushina is one of the last Uzumaki in the world, not some spare to replace me if I screw up and die. Your child is your child. Just because we're at war doesn't mean that Liv stopped to watch. He stopped and sat down against the wall opposite me, rubbing his face. Kichiro-kun, the only person in your generation this village absolutely cannot afford to lose is you. At the same time, you are not a Kage, you are not a leader, and you don't understand the sacrifices that have to be made. As mature, intelligent, and skilled as you are still one of the children you so ardently defend. Inside the village, my son, Minato, and Kushina are safer than they could ever be outside of it. You're leading the relative security here and refusing the best protection I can offer you. The Raikage will honor his agreement. No one can promise that. If you're looking for reassurance, you won't get it from me, I said, kneeling down in the center of the room. My stance will not change. If there is no other suitable jonin, then I will go alone or with Kato-san and trust the Raikage to honor his agreement. We both stood back up. I kept my eyes focused on the ground as he stopped in front of me. I hope your trust is well placed, he murmured, a hand on my head. After a moment, he walked past and opened the door. Orochimaru left, he wouldn't explain why, Dan murmured as he entered. You all right, smart aleck? He asked as he caught sight of me and draped an arm around my shoulders. I'm fine, I answered, distracted as to why Orochimaru would just leave. Had my comment made him that paranoid? I quickly refocused my attention as the Hokage explained the mission. 20 minutes later we stood at the village gates facing the Raikage. This is going to be an awkward trip, I muttered, kicking a stone down the path in front of me. Then let's start this out right. Dan chirped, then started to sing while I stared at him incredulously. Oh Danny boy, the pipes are calling. What the hell? That was certainly not any Japanese tune, and the words were certainly English. Author's note, biggest news of today, June 7th, happy birthday, Kichiro. I'm not sure if I ever mentioned the specific date in the story itself, but if not, today's the day. Chapter 19. I made it until noon before I had to say something. You know English, I stated unoriginally, in English. The Raikage sent us a strange look but didn't comment. Smart Alec is in Japanese, kiddo. I gaped at him. Both languages were so ingrained in me, from my own 27 years in my world, and the 7 years of Kichiro's memories, as well as total immersion for 2.5 years. When did you get here? 2.5 years ago. I woke up seconds before the invasion and subsequent destruction of Uzushiogakure began. I'm assuming you died just before that. You died in a different world. Yes. I stopped some teenager from mugging a kid and he shot me in the back of the head. Certainly not the way I wanted to go. What happened to you? I was helping the search for survivors when one of the aftershocks of the Haiti earthquake hit and the building collapsed on top of me. How old were you? 13. I had gone with my father to help with the relief effort the day after the first earthquake hit. I woke up, as you say, as an infant, terrified out of my mind for weeks before I caught sight of the Hokage monument and realized where I was. I still had absolutely no idea what was going on. I only ever read the first few chapters of the manga before I left for the relief effort, and there was only one phase on the mountain and half of another being carved. So I started over as an orphan with a head start. I chose my old name to go by and made my given name my new surname. My hopes of someone I could pool knowledge with plummeted faster than a paratrooper with a broken parachute. When did you die? How old were you? A bit less than a decade after you. I was 27. Damn, a full adult and then being stuck as a child. That's rough, buddy. You still sane in there? He knocked on my head. Huh, I think so. It's not all bad here, kiddo. Could you please speak normally? The Reikage grunted. Our conversation has absolutely nothing to do with anything you would care about. Jinchuriki or not, I can still crush you, boy, so don't cross me. I'll cross whomever I wish, Kage or not. Enough, Kichiro, he's not the Hokage. He's still. Enough. Fine. The rest of the day passed in mindless silence. Traveling at shinobi speeds would get us attacked before Dan would be able to show the mission assignment. At this speed, it would take us nearly a month to get to the border. As night fell, no one bothered to call for a stop. I didn't need one considering I had the advantage of the QB supplying energy should I need it, and I decided now would be the best time experimenting with breaking down adenosine with chakra. After 10 minutes, the Reikage grabbed my shoulder, which made Dan whip out a tanto, only for it to be blocked by the Reikage Jonin. I glared up at the Kage. What are you doing? He demanded, pointing at my forehead. Taking a step back, I escaped his grip. Experimenting. With what? Why? It's just an Iryo ninjutsu technique I'm trying to develop, no reason to get paranoid. It's as boring as an empty library just walking all day, and I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we're apparently not stopping for the night and do something useful. Make camp, he ordered me. I rolled my eyes. I don't take orders from you. Treat it as a training exercise, you're still a Chunin. Chunin, actually, I'm a Chunin and have been a Chunin for several months. I know how to make a damn camp. I've spent enough time on the front lines and infiltrating, so go make your own camp. I sleep in the trees. To prove my point, I bent my knees and leapt upwards, aiming for the tallest branches of the tree that would support my weight, far above where any shinobi would travel. Before I made it 10 feet up, Dan stood in my path, glaring. Just because you're physically a child doesn't mean you have to act immaturely. I was never a mature adult, and since I can't hide my intelligence, I have to act like a child somehow. Then at least act like someone has authority over you before you piss off the wrong person and get put down for being a loose cannon. Is that some verbal Konoha code or something? The Reikage Jonin asked. No, Dan answered, leaping down. I followed, appearing properly chastised. And no other questions about it will be answered. Straight face. The days passed monotonously. No one spoke unless it was absolutely necessary. I entertained myself with chakra control exercises and learning the basics of fire manipulation. I had a tenuous understanding of wind, earth, and water, even though I knew a total of 6 actual elemental ninjutsu, which was a pathetic repertoire for a Chunin. Iryo ninjutsu didn't count, even though I could heal almost anything if I had enough time. By the time we reached the border, 11 single words and 1 phrase of expletives had been spoken over the 2 weeks before. 8 of them had been Dan telling me no when I opened my mouth to ask permission to do something. 3 were the Reikage telling me stop when my attempts to learn the basics of fire manipulation without a proper teacher led to bright flashes of light, sharp pops, or a mixture of both. After the 3rd reprimand, the Reikage was fed up with my constant failure and demonstrated how to properly complete the exercise. It only took a few days after that to get it right. At which time I made a show of attempting to practice the basics of lightning when the Reikage nearly gave me a heart attack with an extremely focused burst of killing intent. I switched back to practicing medical ninjutsu after that. At least then, the chakra never left my body and no one could complain. The expletives came from the Kumo Jonin, who found himself pranked by yours truly. I wanted to prank the Reikage, just to say I did, but every attempt failed via him staring down at me until I dismantled the trap. I was just a chunin promoted too quickly. I wasn't sure what got me thinking I could pull one over on a technically enemy Kage. Dan knew of the Uzumaki penchant for practical jokes and was properly wary. The Kumo Jonin had not been warned, so when his turn came to take point, I used a shadow clone to set up a prank spider web about a quarter-mile ahead along our projected path during my period on watch. As the camp was packed up, I deliberately dragged my feet to the point where the entire party was quite annoyed with me. The reaction was better than I had anticipated. I expected the flailing, spluttering, maybe a yelp. I did not expect curses and scrubbing and the Jonin to start beating imaginary bugs. The Raikage was genuinely amused, if disappointed. My dispersed shadow clone had left residual traces of my chakra in the area, and the Jonin should have known something was up. Alas, the arrogant and annoyed fell to me. Dan had the tact not to laugh, and I quickly moved on ahead so no one would see my smirk. Straight face. The prank may have lightened the atmosphere, but as soon as we reached the point to where Konoha had conquered, the Raikage's hostility towards me in particular shot to new heights, probably because I made it possible for nearly 20% of Konoha's fighting force to return to battle while his numbers continued to diminish. When I graduated from Konoha's medic nin program, I had silently promised myself that I would help anyone who approached me peacefully. Until we crossed the no man's land between the two armies, I had only ever met Konoha nin peacefully. When we entered the Kumo camp, one of the first thing I noticed was the tarp set up over the station for the wounded. While the Raikage and Dan spoke with the leader of the camp, I found myself wandering over to the injured, just like I had done for weeks with Sakumo's team. Old habits die hard. Inside, there was slightly more than 30 people. About 2/3 had little chance of a continued career or even survival without the help of a medic nin. No one stopped me, so I knelt down beside one of the feverish men near the edge. Someone had attempted to gut him, but didn't manage to make the blow immediately lethal. Whatever medic was responsible for the base had sewn his skin back together, but by the look of the shinobi around him, there wasn't a real medic nin available and they were regulated to field treatment. I could have fixed him up in 3 minutes, but an unfamiliar infection was impairing his breathing and it took me another 10 minutes to fix. I was nearly finished when a giant hand grabbed my arm and tore me away, throwing me onto my back. "Stay away from our people, bastard Leafchild." I barely managed to roll out of the way of his kick and blast him backwards with an overpowered version of my wind battering ram. I ducked under a second strike and sucked the second assailant into the ground up to his neck. "Wind prison jutsu!" I cried and caught a third attacker before he could land a punishing blow to my ribs. I didn't even see the Raikage appear behind me and grab my neck, disrupting my focus on the prison. I tried to stab his hand with a wind-strengthened senbon, but it shattered when it hit his lightning armor. That is not the ninjutsu of a 6-month-old shinobi. The Raikage roared at Dan, who was crouched defensively, a hand on his kunai pouch and eyes darting to the quickly assembling ninja. The Raikage's grip was too strong and too tight for me to suck in even a mouthful of air. The pounding in my ears quickly drowned out the rest of the exchange while I kicked and clawed at him. When my peripheral vision began to darken, he finally dropped me. I landed on all fours, gasping, and making a mental note to figure out how to bypass the actual intake of air with medical ninjutsu. The chakra burns around my neck were the least of my worries. "The hell, you people!" I snapped as soon as I was able. I was just healing the man. "Kichiro!" Dan snapped. I stood up and held a hand glowing with medical ninjutsu over my throat. The Raikage grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the edge of camp in the direction I assumed Kumo lay. "We're leaving," he growled. "I can see that," I muttered back. "But at least a quarter of the men under that tarp will die in the next week if they don't receive proper medical treatment, and half of those remaining will never be able to fight again once they recover." He stopped abruptly. "You never got close enough to determine that." "No, but I have eyes and I spent 5 months healing in camps just like this on every front of Konoha's fight." Unless they're deliberately hiding it, I can get an idea of the severity of the injuries by sight. Let me go back and I can promise 3/4 of the men under that tarp will be up and fighting within a week. I'd also get a fairly good idea of the median chakra levels of their fighting force, the standard of the general health of his army, the approximate length of time ninja generally spent at the borders, and if I was a bit invasive in the healing, I could determine their general diets as well, but that wasn't the point and I certainly wasn't going to tell him that. By his expression, he already knew exactly what Konoha medic mean were capable of and was weighing the risk versus the reward. His urge to do everything in his power to help his comrades won. We leave at nightfall. Heal what you can, but know you will run under your own power. He released me and marched off, signaling to the audience. Dan leaned against the rock wall part of the tarp ceiling was attached to. I glanced around and saw several Kumonin watching me. A few seemed just curious and were balanced out by several who were obviously hostile. One of those hostiles had the look of a medic. The half-dozen others were either scoffing at me or just curious. Only one stepped underneath the tarp. It was a blue-haired girl, obviously a fresh Chunin and a few years younger than Kushina. "See, can you please fix Tachan, Shinobi-san?" She begged and pointed to one of the more critically injured, his mess of blue hair dyed red with blood. I nodded and let her pull me over to him, hovering by my shoulder, just out of my sight, while I worked on healing him. He had a severe concussion to go alongside the gash from the nape of his neck to his temple. He lost half his ear, but that was the least of his worries. His collarbone was broken in 5 places, which I wasn't sure how a single bone could have that many breaks, but I just set the bone and urged it along the first stages of healing. He has an infant child at home and his wife is dead. A kunoichi pointed at a man a few feet away. I went to him next. The man was conscious, but barely so. The flesh of his arm was cut to ribbons, infected, from the elbow down, and the tourniquet was about to destroy the limb. "Blood type?" I asked, one hand sifting through my medic pouch to pull out a tube with a needle on both ends. "A negative," the kunoichi answered. "Is anyone else the same?" I asked. Eyes glanced around, but no one was willing to step forward. "I can't do squat for him, I'm B positive and he's A positive." I jerked a thumb at Dan, who was not happy I knew his blood type and very not happy I announced it to a bunch of potential enemies. Someone stepped forward and sat down, holding out their arm. Guided by medical chakra, I inserted the needle into one of the medium-sized arteries in the donor's forearm and placed a wad of bandages in his hand. Luckily, Kumonin seemed to have similar basic training in assisting medics as the Jonin generally taught Konoha Genin teams, and I had taught Minato and Kushina before they graduated. I swallowed past a lump in my throat and waited as the blood filled the thin tube before inserting it into the vein on the inside of the recipient's upper arm. A volunteer stepped forward to hold the half-dead man down to prevent more damage. I took off the tourniquet and started the healing, putting the torn flesh together like a morbid puzzle and clearing the infection. After 5 minutes, I ordered them to stop the transfusion, letting them figure it out by themselves. The man's lower arm was about half the size it was before due to fluid loss and losing a fair chunk of muscle, but by the time I finished, he would be able to use it just fine if he stuck to some kind of rehabilitation routine that Kumo medics could figure out. It would leave some impressive scarring that I didn't care about. The shinobi who donated blood wordlessly pointed at another man with severe lacerations, clumsily stitched up with the same style of needlework as the first ninja I healed. The next 3 patients sported severe burns and dehydration. After that was someone dying of poison. 2 more ninja were on the point of death via exsanguination and I had to begin 3 more blood transfusions. Konoha had nearly double the number of battlefield medics than any of the other countries, but the makeshift hospitals were always twice as busy. The payoff was that Konoha's mission survival rate was twice as high, even if the success rate was only average. Sure, the physical health of the Leaf was exemplary, but the mental health care was nearly non-existent beyond "you're not going to murder your teammates or yourself so you're fit for duty," just like every other country. I wasn't sure they understood that crazy was an illness, not a choice. When the sun began to set, I found myself nearly finished and glaring at a man who shoved a kunai into his own shoulder a few minutes before and seemed to expect me to heal him. When I finally made him cringe, I started the healing. It quickly became evident why he injured himself, but it didn't appease me the slightest. You know, stabbing yourself makes the original injury 10 times more difficult to heal, I informed him as I placed my hands on his shoulder. At least he had the decency to look slightly sheepish. There was no original injury, the Kumo medic spat. Well, that's just incompetence on your part, I retorted. A civilian knows there's something wrong with inflammation. Kichiro, Dan warned. I ignored him. I was, to everyone here, 9 years old and had just healed several dozen people out of the kindness of my heart. I was allowed to be overtired and snappy, especially after having to deal with crazy stitching, incompetent preliminary treatment, and infections that shouldn't have happened. The medic bristled, but none of the spectating Kumo nin made any defense, which only made him angrier. I'd like to see you do better with no supplies. I winced. Bro, the only supplies I used was for the transfusions. You have no idea. Of what? What it's like to run a medic tent? No, I have no idea, but I did spend 5 months playing traveling war doctor, so I know that regular chinin can stitch up their own puncture wounds better than you. Shots fired. That's enough, the Reikage interrupted. It's time to go. I'm almost done, hold on, I protested. A minute of the Reikage's impatience later, I pulled my hands away. I'm tired, I announced, only to have Dan slap the back of my head. You made your bed, now lie in it. The idiom didn't translate very well, but I got the message. On my own, I would have collapsed from exhaustion around midnight, so a few hours after we left the camp, I began to draw on the Kyuubi's chakra. I found out then that the Kyuubi had a bit more pride than I thought. Drawing on the Kyuubi's chakra was one thing. I could probably do so without drawing any significant attention towards myself, besides my eyes turning a bit red. That Reikage is too secure in his own abilities. Crush that security. What? That man does not understand the power I wield, and I will not be ordered about by the likes of him, even by proxy. No one ordered anything. I wouldn't expect a small-minded creature like you to understand. I take offense to that. The Kyuubi's chakra fluctuated wildly. Stop and make camp. Shit! I yelped and nearly crashed to the ground, disoriented. The Kyuubi flooded my body with chakra and burned the bottom of my left foot. Ow, 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 ow. I cried, trying to slow my momentum while hopping on one foot. Dan, the Reikage, and the 4 Kumo Jonin we picked up from camp all stopped and spun around to face me, ready to fight. I continued to hop around swearing while I struggled to take my shoe off to stop the irritation. Finally, I just sat down and the Kyuubi snapped back his chakra, laughing at the silent invectives I heaped on him. The bottom of my foot was disgusting and untouchable. Heal it and let's keep moving, the Reikage ordered. I winced at the Kyuubi's growling and covered my ears, even though it didn't help. Reikage-sama, healing chakra burns from another person is a complicated process. Healing chakra burns from tailed beast chakra is doubly so and requires more chakra than I have at the moment. Unless someone volunteers to carry me, I ain't moving. Good, little rat. I am not your pet. He just growled. Also, I may be able to control the Kyuubi, but I can only do so with his cooperation. If he wants something as simple as stopping for the rest of the night, I'm damn well going to give it. Now, am I going to hop to a suitable campsite or are you going to show me? I expected the Reikage's face to purple or his fists to clench angrily, but he just sighed. You and you, stay here with him and politely escort him to the place we decided on for the sealing. Everyone else is coming with me to Kumo. I'll retrieve the candidates. At that, he left. Straight face. 4 days of easy travel later and being watched at almost all times, I landed in the top of a temple an hour before noon. What is this place? I called down, surveying the surrounding land. A temple, one of my escorts grunted. I wished I at least knew their names, but when I had asked, they just ignored me. I can see that, but it's abandoned and I want to know why. Poison, the other explained. Why? Traitors. You are awful at answering questions. Were they betrayed or did they turn against someone else? Betrayed. Can I explore or is it holy ground? Do what you like, but try and find a place suitable for the ceiling. I scowled. That was the point. After a minute longer of perching at the highest point of the tower, I slid down the sloped roof and swung inside. The place was obviously built for shinobi, the reinforcement seals on the walls gave it away in an instant. I spent a good 3 hours copying them for Kushina and deciphering them for myself. It wasn't Uzumaki work, which neither of us had much experience with. Keeping an eye out for writings and more seals, I prowled around the temple until it was too dark to see. I camped separately from the Kumonin that night. Sometime during that night, the wreckage returned with an entourage of children, which I only saw when I looked down at the camp in the morning. No one called for me, so I finished my exploration before returning to the group. About time you showed your face, the wreckage growled at me. Yeah, well, unless you want a Biju rampaging your country, then you'll be glad I found a place I can set up the proper security seals the Hokage gave me. Took you long enough. There was interesting seal work. I'm not a genius, you know, so it took me a while to figure out if it would interfere with my seals. Mind introducing me to the newcomers? I dismissed his attempt to gain superiority. He whistled loudly and the kids roughhousing a distance away under a somewhat familiar man's watch ran up and stood in a disturbingly straight line, peering at me curiously. Brand new Hatake glinted in the sunlight and I self-consciously rubbed mine, grungy from lack of care. A jonin stood behind the half-dozen mini shinobi, his hand on one of their shoulders. They were certainly younger than me, if bigger. Off to the side, Dan sat with another girl, who looked to be barely 4, and played patty cake with her, fascinating the child with the English words. Over there is the host of the Nibi, the wreckage explained, quiet enough that the children couldn't hear him. Have fun traveling with a toddler in wartime. These children are the strongest candidates for the Hachibi. Why do I feel like you've already made your decision? I have a preference of which child is chosen, but any are acceptable. The young man behind them is my son, A, and his hand is on his adopted brother, B. The wreckage continued introducing the other children, who were beginning to fidget under my gaze, and still unable to hear our conversation, though I was certain A could hear us just fine. May I talk to them or do you expect me to decide on looks alone? Do whatever you need. For once, the rivalry between our villages comes second. I want my people safe. Are they all orphans? Yes. Figures. Do they know why they're here? No. Fine. Is there any particular details you want me to avoid telling them? Konoha and Kumo made a pact for peace, and one aspect of that pact was Konoha agreed to make a reliable Jinchuriki seal for the Hachibi and perform the sealing. One of them will be chosen as the next Jinchuriki. That is all they need to know. Do I have your word you won't interfere? Don't kill them. Pull your son away from them and put the jonin at a perimeter of 30 meters. What do you plan on doing? Scaring the living hell out of them. They ought to know what they're signing up for, and if they back down from my challenge, they won't be able to control the Hachibi. I was told the seal would do all of the work. Well, whoever told you that was wrong? I wrote the seal. In about 5 years, give or take a few months, the willpower of the Jinchuriki will be what keeps the seal intact. If the Jinchuriki wants to release the Hachibi, the seal will have no power. That's not what I agreed to. No, You agreed to Konoha sealing the Hachibi so it won't escape, not so it couldn't be released. If it makes you feel better, the Hokage didn't know about my stipulation. Treat them properly, make everyone else treat them like a human being, and you won't have any problems. I'm willing to let you make one of my most promising genin into a monster. You have no right to dictate. The Jinchuriki are not monsters. We are people with sentient masses of chakra sealed inside of us. There is a very clear distinction. The Kyuubi hasn't changed my DNA, and the Hachibi won't change the DNA of whomever it's sealed inside. I am still human. Maybe I don't know firsthand the full implications of being a Jinchuriki, but I know how most of them are treated, and I will not subject anyone else to that. The Raikage was not happy. Do not harm those genin, and I will overlook your insubordination. Your reasons are valid. I'll fix them when I'm done, and I don't answer to anyone but the Hokage. With a single motion, the Jonin all leapt away, leaving me in charge of 6 genin, all bigger than me, even if they were younger and less experienced. They first fell out of the mostly attentive lines and moved to flank me, assessing what kind of threat I posed. Do any of you know what a Jinchuriki is? I began conversationally, holding my chin high and closing my eyes. A monster, one of the genin volunteered. A demon, another snapped. They steal little kids. They destroyed our village several times. They're pure evil. One killed my parents. You're all wrong. Immediate protests and immature verbal abuse flew towards me. I stood still until it stopped, the kids confused by my lack of retaliation, but not yet willing to escalate things. What am I? A Konoha nin, one spat as if it was the worst insult in the world. The others agreed. Oh, I'm so much more than that, you foolish brats. I'm a Jinchuriki, the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. One of them leapt at me. I backhanded him across the face hard enough to make him hurt, but not cause any serious damage. Completing a full turn, I threw Senbon into each of their chests, stopping them dead and giving them each an impressive dose of a hallucinogenic mint to amplify their emotions. Only then did I open my eyes. Before you attack me, let me tell you something. By the end of this day, one of you will be chosen to become a Jinchuriki. The things you described a Jinchuriki as will be what everyone thinks you will be. How many of you like nice, warm hugs? After, no one will dare touch your hideous body. Your friends will hate you, shun you. The civilians will refuse to sell to you. Parents will hide their kids from you. The worst part will be that you'll still be you, everyone else will turn against you because they simply don't understand. They stood rooted in their places, terrified. One of them collapsed, crying. You're a Konoha ninja. Konoha ninja always lie. B shouted. I took a step to the side to look him in the eye. Am I lying? Check my pulse, it's steady. My breathing is perfectly normal, as are my pupils. I'm not fidgeting or defensive. Tell me, am I lying? Even if I was lying, I could control my body well enough to fool most jonin. The Raikage. The Raikage has a Biju to seal. He must make a monster to stop one. A hero would never do something so awful. Another kid shouted at me. I grabbed the arm of the kid who collapsed. Look around you. There's at least a dozen jonin surrounding us all right now. The Raikage himself is watching. Just watch, they won't do a thing. With a sharp jerk, I bent the kid's elbow the wrong way until the bone snapped. The kid screamed. I knocked him unconscious the second my point was clear. 2 of the kids turned tail and ran, leaving 3 of them about to attack me. I pulled on the Kyuubi's chakra and let the weight of it wash over them, studying their reactions. One collapsed from the pressure, leaving only B and another genin standing, their clothes smoking slightly and swaying in the spot. You're pathetic, you know that? I sucker punched B in the face. There was 6 of you and only 2 of you are left. Let's get him, Motoi. B snarled and the two leapt at me together. I knew in a test of brute strength against them I would lose, chakra enhancement or not. When both of them stepped forward, I managed to catch them both in a jinjutsu that had them fighting a fake me. With a bit of skill and concentration, I made it so they both thought the not me had knocked out the other and the not me shouted constant taunts and insults at them. To the jonin, they probably looked like absolute fools fighting nothing while I worked on healing the kid whose arm I broke. It was stretching my concentration thin, but I managed and finished healing slightly before either boy made progress against the not me. Motoi managed to take down the not me first with an unexpected jutsu. I kept everything at their level, otherwise he never would have succeeded. I watched as he had the not me completely at his mercy. You're a monster murderer who only deserves death. He snarled and stabbed a kunai through my head. That was disturbing, I commented, releasing the jinjutsu on him. You fail. I caught his subsequent punch with one hand and knocked him out with medical ninjutsu. When he hit the ground, I shook out my hand. Little brat hits hard, I commented to myself and turned to where B was still fighting the not me. With a clever twist of his dual swords against my sticks as well as a very sneaky trip I probably would have fallen for if it was a real fight, he sent the not me tumbling to its back. You're here for a reason. Why? Why aren't the jonin doing anything about this fight? They could crush you in seconds, but they're letting me fight. I'm not stupid, I recognize you from the bingo book, Uzumaki Kichiro. What are you doing in Kumo and how did you get the Rakich's permission? I didn't answer. You were playing with me. You're a much better fighter than what you showed, you lost because you wanted to. Why? What do you want? I stayed quiet. Fine, then take your secrets with you, you're not worth my time. He knocked up the not me with a well-aimed punch. I dissolved the jinjutsu. Good job, B-san. You passed the test. He whirled around in surprise. Test? Yep. Kai! He shouted, but there was no jinjutsu to dispel. You were right in thinking I was playing with you, but don't feel bad, I was promoted to Chunin before I finished my first mission, which brought me straight to the war front and earned me a fancy moniker. I'm here because I'm an Uzumaki and a Jinchuriki with the skill to seal the Hachibi as part of the peace deal with your village. What kind of test was that? He demanded. What was the purpose? To see if you had the qualities to not go crazy when you become the Hachibi Jinchuriki. What qualities? Mercy, forgiveness, and maturity are the main ones. You tempted me to kill you? It was just a jinjutsu, I shrugged. And you didn't, so we're cool. I don't get it. It's alright, brother, A appeared at B's back. The Rakichi followed with a large amber jar under his arm. When will you be ready to conduct the sealing? The Rakichi asked. I scowled up at him. You could just say you want me gone as soon as possible. Before any sealing is done, I need to talk to B. He thrust the jar at me as well as a scroll. I took them warily. The Hachibi is sealed in the jar and the scroll has instructions on how to slowly release him. At the end of the scroll is a seal. Activate it when you're finished with the sealing. Until then, the two of you will be the only individuals within 10 kilometers, for safety reasons. I don't want to see your face again until you are finished. B quickly turned to his adopted brother, alarmed. The two conversed quietly while the jonin picked up the other genin and left. I exchanged a glance with Dan, who nodded once before turning and leading with everyone else. The Rakichi leapt away, and after a moment, A followed, leaving us alone. Turning towards me, B lifted his chin, resolved. You don't have to look tough for me, kid, I don't give a damn. You're littler than me. He protested. Yeah, sure, you're still younger. Come on, let's go inside to talk, there's some things I have to tell you. Chapter 20. B followed me into the heart of the temple, his head down. I closed the door and set up Kushina's system of privacy seals from my bag that I left in the room once I determined I would use it. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I don't want anyone listening, at least not until you decide you want to share what I tell you with someone." "What are you talking about?" "You're crazy." "I'm not crazy." "Sit down." I took a seat on the floor in the center of the room. Warily, B sat down across from me. Slowly and deliberately, I took off my Hatake and stripped off my gloves, showing him the dark seals on my skin. He stared at them without comprehension. These seals are part of the Shidogo, which is a seal that makes its victim incapable of lying to, directly disobeying, and betraying the person who wields it, at least, not without significant harm to themselves. I'll come back to this. I slowly pulled my gloves back on, but left my grungy Hatake balanced on my knee. The day I became a Jinin, someone kidnapped my sister. Uzumaki chakra is exceptionally compatible with sealing as well as perfectly suited to safely contain even the most powerful of the Biju, which makes the Uzumaki perfect candidates for becoming Jinchuriki. They kidnapped my sister with the intent of turning her into a Jinchuriki, but we stopped it. When we returned to the village, the Hokage and the previous Kyuubi Jinchuriki, who was getting old, decided it was time to pass on the mantle. "Why do I care about how you became a Jinchuriki?" B grumbled. "Isn't it supposed to be a village secret?" "Ha, you don't need to care about my story, but you still need to know it." Anyways, they wanted to pass the Kyuubi onto my sister. She was an all-around better candidate, impressionable, obedient, and eager to please, plus she had a far better understanding of sealing than me. I was a less than desirable candidate, to put it nicely. I was an antagonistic, hard-headed, devil-may-care, insubordinate child who was far too smart and perceptive for my own good. I wouldn't let them turn my sister into someone scorned and detested by the general populace. For some reason, they let that opinion stand and sealed the Kyuubi into me that evening. They also placed the Shidogo, which basically makes me a slave to the Hokage. Again, why do I care about your sob story? It's a warning. Becoming a Jinchuriki means you'll have access to power and lots of it. That makes people greedy. No matter how honorable the intentions are, you will be used and potentially abused. Most people will see you as less than human, feral. I've done what I could to make sure the Reikage treats you like a person, or at the very least as a regular shinobi, albeit with a special skill set, but that will only go so far. Your life is going to be hard, an upwards battle for positive attention. You must understand that and consent to it before I will perform the sealing. I have my brother. He'll make sure that your brother is set to be the next Reikage. As much as he may want to, he can't shield you from most of it. He can't stop your friends from pulling away. B shifted uncomfortably. Motoi would never do that. No, B, he would in a heartbeat, everyone would. The Hachibi killed his father died because a Jinchuriki lost control. Maybe he'll come around eventually, but you're going to be hated until you prove to everyone you can be trusted, which won't happen for a long time. Just your existence means you're a threat. You're wrong. I wish I was. Now, are you willing to go through with the sealing, or should I call the Reikage back and have him find a new set of candidates? How old are you? 9. You talk like an adult. I've spent the last 2 years of my life with adults, it makes sense I'll start to sound like them. You're 9 and you say you can seal a Biju? How strong are you? Sealing a Biju is a lot different than fighting one. I'm an Uzumaki, so sealing is in my blood, but I'm nowhere near the level I need to be in order to fight one. You said you recognized me from the bingo book, so I'm sure you know who Hatake Sakumo and Senju Tsunade are. I made my way through Tsunade's medic program in half the time it takes adult medics, and Hatake is my Jonin sensei. He's been training me since I was 7. You give out information easily. You know that can be used against you. Trust me, if you think anyone can catch Hatake without getting their hands chopped off, they're welcome to try. As for my sister, keep an eye on what happens to Suna over the course of this war and you'll get an idea about what happens to someone who threatens children of Konoha. You're not a very nice person. I'm not, at least not anymore. I pulled out the scroll with my seal on it. I'll ask again, are you willing to go through with the sealing? Why did you pick me? You didn't take revenge for my insults, you didn't let them really bother you. You're strong and you have someone to take care of you. You also didn't collapse under the Kyuubi's chakra. Any more questions? Will it hurt? Probably, but it won't cause any lasting damage. I don't, he broke off. If you don't want to do this, I won't seal the Hachibi inside of you, no one can make me. You said the Shitago. The Hokage left the choice of who completely up to me and the Reikage can't order me around. He'll hurt you. Then I transform into the Kyuubi and devastate his village. The boy gaped at me. Unlike most Jinchuriki, a full, voluntary transformation probably won't hurt me. If it does, fine, I'm free to head to the afterlife. You're insane. Am not. R2. I will not be a part of this immaturity. Do you want time to think? I agree. He bit his lip uncertainly. Becoming a Jinchuriki is not part of the contract you signed when you became a shinobi, so it's not your duty to do this. You are accepting of your own free will, nothing your brother or the Reikage says should tip your decision either way, you understand that, right? After a moment of thought, B nodded. Once you become the Jinchuriki, you understand that you will be taking on the responsibility of guarding everyone around you from the rampage of the tailed beast sealed inside of you. He nodded again. Fine. I pulled out a scroll from one of my pockets and held it up. This is a complete explanation of the seal I'm going to use. One of the most important points for you to remember is that the seal only works as long as you want it to. Secondly, the Hachibi is not a mindless force of nature. He is intelligent and has emotions just like you. He's spent a long time going through a cycle of imprisonment, subjugation, and brief moments of freedom. He's bitter and angry about it, just like anyone would be if they spent more than a lifetime as a prisoner. The Hachibi is immensely powerful, you'll be able to feel that power through the seal. I'll warn you once. Do not try and use it without the Hachibi's consent. Finally, if you ever need help, I'll do what I can to help you, just find me, okay? Just because we're from different villages doesn't prevent us from being brothers by circumstance. I'll always help out a family member. I let it sink in while I stood and added the Biju suppressing seals from the Hokage to the walls of the room. B watched me carefully even when I stopped to do nothing more than read the Reikage's instructions. I'm ready, I finally announced, pulling out my sealing kit. B nodded and I felt like I was talking to a bobblehead. Take your shirt off and lie down. He obeyed and I started to paint the seal onto his stomach. For horribly tedious hours later I finished. This is your absolute last chance to back out, are you sure you want to go through with this? I asked. Absolutely, B said with more conviction than ever before. I winced as the Kyuubi's chakra bubbled over my skin. Just to be safe, he explained. With one hand, I unlocked the jar with the Hachibi inside. His chakra filled the room and would have knocked me out if the Kyuubi hadn't been filtering it. Kyuubi! The Hachibi snarled. How dare you manipulate your host like this? I activated the seal and the Hachibi's chakra started to drain into it. B screamed in pain as the Biju chakra rushed through his body. It was unnerving to have my mouth moving without my consent, but I let the Kyuubi say his piece. You are angry and impulsive, just as I was. Until your mind clears, and you are able to help me in my quest, you will remain sealed. Who are you to decide that? You have no authority. When you understand, you know where you can speak with me. I gasped as the Kyuubi's chakra receded and the last of the Hachibi was pulled inside of the seal. After taking a minute to control myself, I turned to B, who lay curled on his side and facing away from me. "You alright?" I asked him. "Give me a minute." I fell backwards, my arms spread, and more exhausted than I expected. "Can I call the rakeage here, or do you want time to yourself?" "Time to myself." I struggled to my feet. "Come find me when you're ready." I deactivated the seals around the room and left with my bag and supplies. "Wait!" B called after me. I stopped, but didn't go back. "You can call Raikage-sama." "Okay. When you come out, bring that jar with you." Straight face. Just before the sun finished setting, the Raikage landed on the steps of the temple. "Where's B?" he demanded. "In the temple, center room." "May I go home now?" "Wait here." I waited, watching the sun creep towards the horizon. A few minutes later, the Raikage returned, holding B's hand and carrying the jar. "Your teammate and the Nibi are straight in that direction," he pointed back towards Konoha. "Kumo thanks you for your services." "You're welcome, goodbye." "Wait!" B said as I took a step away. I stopped. "I can still see you if I need something, right?" "Of course, goodbye, B-san." "Goodbye, Kichiro-sama." I leapt forward and ran in the direction the Raikage pointed. It only took me a few minutes to reach Dan, who was accompanied by a team of Kumo Jonin and had the Nibi Jinchuriki hanging around his neck, asleep. "We need to get back to Konoha ASAP. A child can't travel at shinobi speeds, Kichiro." "Then let me go." I did my job. I even have the trust of the Eight Tails host. Minato and Kushina need me most right now. Once we get to the border, you can run straight back. If you let me carry her, we can move top speed, no risk to the child. Kichiro. "Please." "Fine." He handed me the sleeping girl. "We're ready to go, we can move at top speed." I slipped off my haori and wrapped it around the girl so she wouldn't freeze at the speeds we would be moving and secured her head against my shoulder so she wouldn't be dangerously shaken. After 2 days and nights, we reached the Kumo border. As soon as we made it past Konoha lines and left the Jonin escort behind, I handed the Nibi Jinchuriki back to Dan and took off towards the village, sustaining myself with the Kyuubi's chakra. No one tried to stop me, and I only slept twice. When I landed in front of the village gates, no one stopped me as I marched into the village, but out of nowhere, the Hokage appeared beside me. "Am I right in assuming you had no intention of reporting?" I bent my knees to jump away from him, but he laid a hand on my shoulder. Status of the mission: successful. Minato and Kushina have been put under house arrest as a precaution until you clear them. They're not allowed to interact with civilians. They're at Minato's apartment, since it's in a shinobi-heavy area, unlike yours. Where's Jiraiya? You have 3 weeks of leave. Take it before I change my mind and have your written report for the mission turned in by the end of this week. No need to report to the hospital. I took a step back and dashed to Minato's apartment. As I raised my hand to knock, the last time I saw them flashed across my mind. I felt more than awful for leaving them and fully expected at least one of them to shoot out harsh words. I knocked twice. I could hear familiar voices inside, but didn't listen in on the conversation. I slouched, but stayed in full view of the little fisheye lens in the door. "Come in, Nissan," Minato called out. Warily, I opened the door. To my surprise, it wasn't locked, though there was a nasty explosion seal inked onto the floor, which I stepped over, swinging the door closed behind me. I scanned the hall in front of me. "Hello?" I asked, cautious as I slipped off my shoes. "In the main room," Minato said. He sounded off. As I stepped around the corner, I barely managed to block a bare foot from taking off my head. I expected an angry confrontation, not a trap. With a yelp, I jerked backwards, only to have a thin hand appear out of nowhere and press a crinkle of paper against my back, then activate a seal before I could twist away. Lightning coursed through my body and I screamed, collapsing. When I finally regained my bearings, my hands were tied above my head and I was lying on Minato's bed with both him and Kushina sprawled on top of me, half asleep. I obviously lost more time than I thought, considering I was already sweating underneath them and my hands had gone numb. I jerked experimentally on whatever bound my hands to the metal bar across the headboard and received bullets of pain up my arms for my troubles. I could have gotten out of regular rope just fine, but they had used ninja wire, which had enough tensile strength to lift an entire city, or so I was told. The point was that the thin wire would cut through my wrists rather than break, and it was wrapped around several times. I tried to channel chakra to my senses to do a security sweep, but they had sealed away my chakra, which was impressive, considering they would have had to deal with Biju chakra as well. By that point, I could tell that both of them were now fully awake. Kushina fidgeted with the hem of my shirt. Belatedly, I realized my Chunin vest and gear was missing. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their hands start trading signs over my stomach. To my frustration, I couldn't see anything and my paltry sensing abilities were shot. Deep in my gut, I could feel the QB, but the ceiling made communication impossible. I took a deep breath. "Can we talk?" I asked softly, wriggling my fingers attempting to re-establish a little bit of blood flow. "No," Kushina mumbled. "Okay, why?" Minato's fist slammed into my gut without warning. My breath left in a choked huff and it took me over a minute to regain because both sets of arms tightened around my middle. "Why am I tied up?" I asked instead. That earned me a rather malicious pinch from Kushina. I probably deserved to be stuck as a living pillow, but it didn't mean I should have to worry about my hands dying. I gritted my teeth and started to kick myself upright against the headboard, but I couldn't gain enough leverage to overcome the friction keeping me prone. After a few seconds of struggling, 2 sets of legs locked around my own. I took a moment to wonder how in the 9 circles of hell I made it into this particular position, suffocating under 2 children. "Can you please untie me?" Both of them were forgiving people, so I could understand the clinginess, even if it made me feel sick with myself. What didn't make sense was the fact that I was tied up. I could feel them sharing a look, even though I couldn't see their expressions. "Do you want me to beg?" "No," one of them responded. I couldn't tell who. "Okay, then why am I tied up?" No answer. "I can't do anything or fix anything if you don't even talk to me." Their arms tightened to the point I could barely breathe. I wasn't claustrophobic, but claustrophobia was beginning to set in. "I love you both, but I can't read your minds and I don't know what to do." The last part was wheezed out. Their grip tightened further. I could only take the shallowest of breaths, and the fact that my arms were above my head further restricted my breathing. I started to scrabble at the wire around my wrists. No matter their age, they were ninja and there was a very real possibility they could unintentionally kill me at this point. It was a testament to their skill that even if I dislocated my thumb I wouldn't be able to get out of the wire without losing a hand, or at least several fingers. When the edges of my vision began to darken, I started to panic. "Unless you're actually trying to kill me, you need to let go, now." For a moment, I thought they wouldn't, but after a second, they both jerked away. I wheezed in a breath as Minato cut my wrists free. Rolling onto my stomach, I coughed, struggling to draw in oxygen, my ribs aching. "Nissan? Nissan!" The 2 genin cried as I slumped face down onto the sheets. "I'll be fine, just give me a minute," I assured them, still wheezing and especially lightheaded. I wished I still had my adult body, which would have probably been fine with the abuse and found a new respect for parents with shinobi children. The moment I sat up, both of them lunged at me and slammed me back against the wall. I groaned. Had I been able to reinforce my body with chakra, the rough treatment wouldn't have bothered me, but my body just wasn't that tough on its own. I hugged them back anyways. Kushina all but filled my lap and Minato wedged half his body into the gap between my back and the wall, his face buried in my neck. You have to talk to me, you too. Why'd you jump me when I got here? I asked, still breathless. I'm not angry or upset, I just want to know why. Their arms tightened around me in answer. Gentle, please be gentle. I begged and they loosened their grip. Tears started to dampen my shirt. I want to help the two of you, you both need help, but I can't if you don't talk to me. I still didn't get a response. I sighed and laid my head back against the wall, closing my eyes. Normally, Kushina was all too willing to talk. Without her commentary, it felt strange. Eventually, I started to nod off in the silence, only to jolt awake when Kushina shifted then flinched, pulling her arm towards her chest. Before she could tuck it away, I grabbed her wrist. Her fingernails were coated with dried blood. By itself, it was fairly normal. All but the most meticulous of ninja had a perpetual crescent of red under their nails. Mine was especially prominent, considering I had killed and cleaned a small rabbit the night before as a small meal and only washed my hands in a stream after the blood was mostly dried by the building of a small fire. Kushina, though, had no reason for blood under her nails. Minato's wounds should have closed ages ago, so even if she was helping Minato clean them, they shouldn't have been bleeding and the blood should have washed out by now. She tried to pull her hand away, but I held tight. She had sleeves on, which was uncharacteristic, but she was also wearing Minato's clothes, which was somewhat normal, especially considering she had probably spent several nights, at least, at his apartment. Before she could protest, I shoved up her sleeve to reveal a half-hearted attempt at bandaging several cuts across the inside of her forearms. Minato started to pull his arm away from me, but I grabbed his wrist as well and shoved up his sleeve to find similar marks, as well as blood under his fingernails. Am I right in assuming these were self-inflicted? I demanded, releasing them. After a moment, Minato nodded. I laid my head on his and tightened my arm encircling Kushina. Taking a deep breath, I struggled to slow my heart rate. Have you cleaned them? I asked. Minato shook his head. I thought for a moment. Have you cleaned yourselves? Another negative. Okay then, let's do that now. Kushina shook her head emphatically. Alright, why not? No water. It's not going to hurt you. Promise? Minato demanded. Promise. Kushina's legs locked around my waist as I scooted over the bed, Minato following closely, his hands clutching my waistband. Carrying Kushina was difficult without chakra, but I managed. I was also taking a risk by letting them keep my chakra sealed away, because if one of them freaked and hit me at full strength before I could dodge, I could be seriously hurt. Even so, the fact that they both knew they could easily overpower me probably helped keep them calm. In the bathroom, it was a bit cramped as I turned on the water and partway filled the tub. Minato, you first. I sat Kushina down on the counter beside the sink and held out a hand to the blonde. Cautiously, he took it and I guided him, fully dressed, to the tub and sat him down on the edge, then swung his feet inside. I washed them gently with a small towel while his fingers tangled into my hair. See, it's not going to hurt you. I pulled away and untangled his fingers. I'm going to wait right outside the door. No! He protested. I flinched back at his vehemence and hit the wall just as he threw himself at me and knocked me to the ground. My head cracked against the hard floor. I didn't think I blacked out, which was a plus, but I almost wished I had in light of the instant splitting headache. I groaned and looked down at my hand. It trembled and my vision was blurry. Not good. I definitely had a concussion. Even if I had access to my chakra, I would never screw with my own head. I heard Nissan, Minato whine from somewhere to my right, horrified. Shit, Stupid child body. Instead of helping Minato, making up for my absence, I probably just alienated him. I pushed myself upright and looked in the direction of his voice, only to see the cupboard under the sink slam shut. I tried to reach out to him, but if it wasn't for Kushina, I would have face-planted. I leaned heavily against her to get to a point where I could sit down beside where Minato disappeared. I tried to open it, but Minato held it shut. "Please come out, Minato, I'll be fine." A choked sob answered me. "It was just an accident, Minato, please come out." No answer. "Please, Minato," I begged. After a second of silence, I tried the door, but it was still stuck. "Minato! Open up, please!" I started to panic. He may have grown into a powerful, level-headed Kage in the future, but at the moment, he was an impulsive child on a self-destructive spiral, locked away, alone, and armed with more stress and misplaced guilt than any child had a right to. "Minato, say something, please!" Because of my physical age, training could only do so much for my body strength-wise. Without chakra, I was on par with a civilian adult strength at best. Minato lived in a shinobi complex, and because of that, everything in the house had basic strengthening seals, so an impromptu wrestling match didn't unintentionally destroy the entire complex, and a moment of frustration didn't result in a maintenance bill. I still initiated a wrestling match for the door. It opened slightly, and I wedged my fingers in the gap, hissing as the door closed on them. After a second, Minato let go and I flung the door open. My fears weren't completely unfounded as the boy started to slash at his arm. I reached into my pocket, which the seal inside thankfully hadn't been emptied, and pulled out one of the few senbon I kept in it and threw it through Minato's wrist, pinning his arm to the wall behind him. He dropped the kunai with a choked cry, and I caught it, tossing it away from him before he managed to wrench the senbon out of his wrist. I yanked him out of the cupboard and wrestled him to the ground. I said brief thanks to Sakumo for teaching me how to wrestle against someone stronger and dove into the struggle. Minato tried to run, but I had more than 6 inches and at least 20 pounds on him as well as more experience. Superior strength wasn't going to get him far without a clear head to go along with it. Mindful of the still healing wounds on his chest, I managed to flip him on his back, pinning one of his own arms beneath him and pressing my thumb against the hole in his other wrist as he prepared to throw me off. "Minato, calm down," I ordered. He tried to throw me off, but I had wedged my shoulder underneath the counter of the sink. He may have had double the raw strength to work with, but I had all the leverage, and the cool counter against my cheek felt heavenly considering I was struggling against a fit of lightheadedness. "Minato, I'm not screwing around right now, you have to calm down. You're not in your right head, and I need you to promise me you're not going to ever do something rash like that ever again. Promise me, Minato, please. Nisan. Please, Minato. Promise me you'll never scare me like that again. I hurt you. It doesn't matter. It was an accident." I responded. If he struggled now, I wouldn't be able to hold him down. "Please, Minato, promise me that you won't ever try and hurt yourself again." I promise." I let out a relieved sigh and slipped into unconsciousness. Chapter 21. Spoons and cookies, Minato suggested. "You use spoons to steal cookie dough," Kushina answered. "Streets and tables. They're both places where you can get food," Minato responded. "Corks and cups. They have to relate, Minato," Kushina exclaimed. "They do, Kushina, the connection is drinks," I fired back. "What?" They both chorused. "Corks seal bottles with drinks in them and you drink out of cups." "There wasn't supposed to be a connection," Minato complained. "Then it's against the rules, Minato, you know better." "My turn, mountains and orange juice." Both fell silent, thinking. 10 seconds left. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time. I believe I win that round with 50 points and it's my turn to pick the next game. Wait! What's the relationship? They're both made by squeezing. I got 2 blank looks. You squeeze oranges to make orange juice and 2 pieces of land mush together and mountains come up. Yours are impossible, Nissan, Kushina complained. I guess I'm just smarter than you. Are not. Minato retorted. We scored higher on the genin test than you. You do realize I didn't even take the written test and smoked almost everyone else on the physical test. They scowled at me. Besides, the genin test was months ago and I'm a chunin already, so of course I have to be better than you. Someone knocked on the door. Before I could open my mouth, both genins slid past me and hid underneath the bed. I sighed. I couldn't blame them for being jumpier than water on a hot skillet, but I thought I had been making progress. They agreed to retell what happened, several times, after I explained why they kept uncharacteristically losing control of their emotions and freaking out over innocuous things. Over the past week, I had figured out a number of the triggers that set them off and did my best to attach positive connotations to them. Whoever was at the door knocked again. I closed the door leading to the bedroom/living room/kitchen and peeked out the front door. In an instant, I recognized the Hokage and made no move to open the door further. What do you want? I still have 2 weeks of leave and I turned in my report days ago. You're needed. I refuse. Uzumaki-kun. As the highest-ranking shinobi of my clan, I am, by default, the clan head and it will take a 3/4 majority of the adult and shinobi clan members to replace me. Unless you manage to persuade Ise, Fuso, and Kushina that I am not fit to lead, then as a clan head, I am within my legal rights to refuse any mission on the grounds of duties to my clan. Kushina peeked over my shoulder and Minato pressed his ear to the door. You must be a legal adult. In case you've forgotten as well, I'm a chunin, which means I am a full, legal adult. I even bought a house with my savings so the orphans I brought from Yuzu would have somewhere nice to live and won't have to compete with 100 other children for food and a place to sleep. In fact, it's a rather nice house, and if they wanted, they all could have their own room. The Hokage pinched the bridge of his nose in exasperation. Do we really have a house now? Kushina asked. Yep. As soon as you're cleared for civilian contact, we can go see everyone in it. Hokage-sama, is there anything else? May I come inside? The information I have for you should not be spoken across the doorstep. I gritted my teeth and relented, stepping out of the way and opening the door before retreating down the hall. The Hokage gestured into the main room. Minato eagerly led the way. In the center of the room, an impressive pyramid of my not drugs and bonds stood upright, balanced against each other. Impressive, the Hokage commented. Who made it? I gestured towards the 2 of them, who beamed proudly, before I sat down in one of the 2 chairs around the kitchen table. What do you want to tell me? Suna surrendered as of yesterday morning. Good. Does Konoha have the one tail now? I asked sarcastically. No, but Kato-san returned with the Nibi Jinchuriki last night. They're early. Yes. IWA has made an alliance with AIM against Konoha. Why are you telling me? I can't do anything about it. With help from AIM, IWA has taken full control of Uzushiogakure. I still can't do anything about it. Entire villages are a bit above my weight class. Weight class? Skill level, I explained, slightly annoyed at how badly idioms translated. I'm not stupid enough to drop you into the fighting force. From what little information that has made it back, AIM shared several deadly poisons with IWA, who is utilizing them to their full potential and devastating our ranks. I believe you can repeat your miracle from Suna and become an effective counter. I know a copy of what I did made it to Tsunade and several made it to Konoha. The other medics should be perfectly capable of figuring it out. Attempts have been made, but as of today, not even an antidote has been found to the poisons, much less what you've taken to calling an immunity. Tell the medics to treat the symptoms of the poison. The body will break down the poison by itself, as long as it can function, and build up a tolerance by itself. Just through skin contact, medics are dying from this poison as well. Uzumaki-kun, your advice is helpful, but it is no substitute for your innate understanding of what we're up against. I cross my arms. Let me impress this upon you. People are suffering and dying in that fight. Konoha may have won against Suna and forced peace with Kumo, but we did so at great cost to ourselves. Less than half of our original fighting force is still intact. Genin and a very small handful of ANBU now make up the entire village defense. Then why aren't you out fighting? I accused. I'm leaving tomorrow morning for IWA, he stated. There are no longer enough shinobi stationed in the village for me to effectively manipulate the war effort from here. I gaped at him. Nisan, you can't stay back just for us, Kushina murmured, kneeling beside me and leaning against my leg. We're not that important and we'll be fine until you're home again, Minato promised. You got to go help. Those people need you more than we do. I turned a sharp gaze to the Hokage, but his expression held no triumph, only exhaustion and guilt. He just picked at a groove in the table, eyes averted. Not only is every available man needed against IWA, but that need is reflected in Kiri with similar circumstances, though the medics have better luck in combating more familiar Kiri poisons. This village had next to no defenses remaining and the daimyo is on his way here, considering even in its current state, Konoha remains the safest place in the Land of Fire. Danzo and the rest of my council are leading the fight against Kiri. I know your opinion on them, so I won't ask you to head there. You are needed here and you are needed in the war. If you remain here, you will need to direct the genin, identify and record fatalities, heal the wounded who make it back, and facilitate communication with me, Danzo, the daimyo, and Konoha's civilian leadership. That's quite the sales pitch. Basically, you're considering appointing me temporary Hokage, head medic, and ambassador. Again, you do realize I am a 9-year-old shinin with only a week of experience in the leadership of a clan of 11, nearly all of whom are children. That wasn't exactly true. I was a second lieutenant in my old world, but that only lasted 2 years and my responsibility was child's play in comparison. Oh, the irony. Please stop treating this like a joke, Uzumaki-kun. If I had a choice, I would have thrown you from the forces a long time ago. I would much rather have you somewhere I can keep an eye on you, but your skill set and sharp tongue are well suited for a role here, as well as provides a maximization of resources. I wanted to bolt. Unless I actively sought it out, I tended to avoid responsibility. You want me to stay here? I asked. The responsibility I'm asking you to shoulder is not something I would ask of any other child and I would never order it. You made no agreement to leadership in your shinobi contract, thus you have no obligation to accept, but if you do not, you will be accompanying me to IWA no matter what titles you claim. The so-called laws you reference are merely guideline in time of peace. I am still the absolute authority in this village. I felt like a total, immature ass. Excuse me for a moment, Hokage-sama, I said solemnly and stood, bowed once, and hurried out of the room. I barely made it out of the room before I had to stop, my knees weak. How the hell was the village still standing if it was in as dire straits as the Hokage implied? Why is Nisan upset? Minato asked. He's not upset, Minato-kun, the Hokage explained patiently. He just has a lot to take in that he didn't expect. That's a good thing, right? Kushina asked. No, Kushina-chan. It's not a good thing. The village is in a very bad place right now and a lot is being asked of all of the Chunin and Jonin. Being the youngest of that group means he has a lot of pressure and he deals with it in his own unique way. He's not going to go crazy like I did, right? You are crazy but That's not funny, Minato. You're crazy, but you're you so you're not, just like Nissan says. He's not going to go crazy because Nissan will still be Nissan. The Hokage chuckled softly, but didn't correct him. They fell silent and I took a knee before I fell. It wasn't the pressure that was bothering me. Once the full impact of exactly how bad off we were in this war sunk in more and the blood pounding in my head faded, I returned. I need an answer soon, Uzumaki-kun. If you remain here, there is a lot that needs to be done before I leave. If I stay, how long will it be? It could be a week, it will most likely be several months, it could be several years, but that is highly unlikely. I need your answer, Uzumaki-kun. If I had an even choice between the two options, I knew I would much prefer healing on a battlefield than taking responsibility no one in their right mind would give me if I was my mental age, much less appearing as a prepubescent child. Why? I beg your pardon? Why me? Nearly all of the forces are older and have more experience. Understand that I'm not condoning your actions and words by saying this, but besides you, only my peers ever question my orders or even question authority in general. With the arrival of the daimyo and the pressure of the civilian leadership, the only people I know won't cater to their whims or abuse their power are so desperately needed in the fighting they cannot be sent back here, nor can I leave those who remain with standing orders because decisions need to be made and establishing a communication line is utterly foolish. So you're giving someone with a mistrust of authority and an insubordination record command over the whole village. I need an answer. I said nothing. Most would treat my offer as an opportunity. Mistrust of authority, I repeated. And I have nothing to prove. I still need your answer. I don't know. Okay? I threw my hands in the air and started pacing. I don't want to go back to the front lines. I can't look at someone and let them die without doing something. Strangers aren't worth my time or sacrifice. They don't have a raindrop's chance in hell otherwise. I can't remember the last meal I had. They died because I couldn't get my shit together. Uzumaki-kun. The Hokage barked sharply, sounding suspiciously like a drill sergeant. I briefly straightened and turned towards him. I don't care about the past, I need to know about now. The desire to run intensified. I'm not a leader, I'm not a fighter, I just do what I'm supposed to. Stop psychoanalyzing me. This is one of your elaborate plans, isn't it? It is, but not in the sense you're thinking. You aren't an unwitting piece of this strategy. I'm not psychoanalyzing you. Then what? Your answer, Uzumaki-kun. My eyes burned. I don't know, just wherever I'm most useful, I'll get the job done, whatever it is. I turned on my heel and left, locking myself in the bathroom. I leaned over the sink, my gut feeling like someone tangled a beater in my intestines. When I glanced up at the mirror, I saw my eyes were puffy. Stupid childhood hormones. I was just frustrated, not upset. I was angry and overwhelmed, not sad. I wasn't a child, I had no right to cry. I turned on the cold water, hoping the shock would jolt everything into perspective. I jumped and scraped the back of my hand on the faucet as someone knocked on the door. Screw it all! I hissed as a trickle of blood swirled down the drain. Who is it? What do you want? I demanded. It's me, the Hokage said softly as I turned off the water, releasing a bit of chakra through the door for identification. I responded automatically in kind. Come to the Academy Auditorium at 1700 hours in full uniform, including your Haori. It was more than enough time to get ready and walk there. I'll be there, I responded. There was a moment of silence and I could feel the Hokage just standing there. Are you all right? He finally asked. I bit back the angry, sarcastic response I wanted to give and settled for a cold dismissal as I watched the blood drip into the sink. You've said your piece. Please leave. He hesitated, but still left without another word. Without paying attention, I cleaned and healed the cut with a small burst of chakra, then splashed my face with water. When my face finally looked mostly normal, I pulled my mission bag out from beneath the sink and changed into my uniform. I donned my weapons as I exited the bathroom. Minato and Kushina stood directly outside the door, looking up at me like they wanted something. "What do you want?" I asked warily, attaching the holster for my sticks to the small of my back. "We want to try for reinstatement," Minato said firmly. "Okay, sure. Can you take us to the hospital before you meet with the Hokage?" Kushina prompted when I just stood there, attaching my kunai pouch filled with senbon to my thigh. I shrugged. "Okay, what prompted this?" I attached my medic pouch to my belt. "We want to help." "Oh, okay then. Go get ready," I told them, pulling on my haori. The two beamed and scampered off. By the time I finished pulling on my sandals, they were both ready and waiting. I fished my sealing kit out of my bag and added it to my medic pouch before standing up, ready to leave, bag left behind. I didn't think they'd pass the requirements, but there was no harm in letting them try. The two bounced ahead of me, down the dreary street. Conversations automatically turned to whispers as I strode past. I hadn't determined exactly why the civilians quieted at my appearance, but they didn't seem hostile, so I didn't exactly care. It might have been the fact my Jinchuriki status wasn't a secret, though not public, or it might have been a distinctive haori, or it might even have been that Chunin under the age of 15 rarely appeared in uniform and Jinin generally appeared as civilians at first glance. At least there wasn't the hero worship I remembered from a few months before, though it was strange not to see children running around on the streets at this time of day. I stared straight ahead and stuck my hands in my pockets, appearing perfectly relaxed, even when Kushina jumped on my back for an impromptu piggyback ride. I dropped them off at the hospital and headed straight to the academy. "I didn't expect you to show up," the Hokage said from the raised platform as I opened the auditorium door. He leaned over a table cluttered with documents and didn't bother to look up at me. "What did you expect?" I asked, slightly curious as he waved me forward. "I thought you would run, choose the life of a missing nin." That was a disturbing thought. I didn't bother to answer as I jumped up onto the platform and surveyed the table of personnel files. "If you thought I would run, then why?" "That doesn't matter. In 40 minutes, all the active ninja in the village will be here for a briefing, save those currently on guard. You need to be caught up on all of their assignments as well as functionally aware of everything you will be dealing with in my absence." I suppressed a smartass response about the impossibility of that endeavor. There are 3 squads of 22 Jinin maintaining a village perimeter at any given time. Of that force, there are 10 others who randomly rotate in or act as replacements. The schedule for the next 3 months is here. He walked over to the podium and carried it closer before placing a large, fat scroll inside of it. This is fairly straightforward, and besides handing out the orders shortly before every shift, it should run smoothly. If the schedule nears its end, make a new one and be sure that no one has a double shift. The Jinin don't have enough experience for it. 3 ANBU will remain here and, at all times, one will be monitoring your decisions and remain available should you need help. Please utilize the assistance and advice they can offer. They have their own orders and will be carrying them out. He motioned behind him. 3 ANBU materialized behind him. This is Boar, Rat, and Bird. Memorize their masks and chakra signature. My eyes flickered up to them. 2 were probably teenagers, considering the entire standing defense force seemed to be far too young to be wise, though I couldn't tell whether they were male or female. The third, Rat, was clearly an adult. I closed my eyes in concentration to detect and make note of their chakra signatures. "Got it," I murmured, and by the time my eyes reopened, all 3 had vanished beyond my ability to detect without the QB's help. Sometime in the next week, the fire daimyo will be returning to the village itself. Please be at the gate to meet him in my stead. You can count on the fact that he will be patronizing and disrespectful. Be polite and respectful in return. I cannot express how important it is that you remain civil, none of your sassiness, sarcasm, snark, and satire in making your point. I snorted at the alliteration. Please remain mature. The daimyo is going to try and take control, and it's his right to control the civilians and demand information, but under no circumstances are you to hand over authority of or information about the shinobi forces I'm giving you, as paltry as they are. If he wants protection, he can follow you around the village. Give this scroll here to him. He held up a thin, official-looking message scroll and placed it beside the fat one. It tells him who you are and what your orders are, including the fact that you are to disregard any orders he attempts to give concerning my shinobi. Do you have questions so far? This is going to sound really immature, but do I have to let some stuck-up noble follow me around? If he wants to, yes. I opened my mouth to protest, but closed it when the Hokage glared at me. You will be mature about this arrangement. He launched into a description of the daimyo's habits, preferences, and brief history that didn't make it into the history books. It was information I could, and would, have gathered on my own with a little experience. Any other questions? No, sir. Next, alongside the genin and ANBU, there are 4 other chunin in the village. Unless the village comes under attack, you should only have contact with one of them. 3 are maintaining the torture and interrogation department, and 1 is dealing with the intelligence department, as well as communications. This is who you will be working with. You'll get along with her. She's quite eccentric and, like you, has an intense mistrust of all but a select few in authority. Messages and information will go through her, and she'll pass on relevant information to you as well as leave you to formulate responses to it. Messages from me and Danzo will be sent directly to you. He continued on to thoroughly explain the communication system, which I determined to be far more complicated than was strictly necessary. Halfway through, I felt the beginning of a migraine forming in the back of my head, like sitting through a lecture that dragged on for far too long. At least I could take notes during a lecture and review them later if I forgot something. If the system could have been written down, the Hokage would have handed me a scroll to read later. I tried to subtly rub my neck, but the Hokage picked up on it in an instant. Are you all right? He asked suddenly. If I was, you wouldn't be asking, I responded, instantly defensive. I know you think I'm one of the worst people alive, but it doesn't mean I don't care about your well-being. My teeth clacked together as I suppressed a biting response. It was like he was trying to antagonize me. I massaged a knot in my neck. There is 11 minutes until the meeting is scheduled to begin, I reminded him. He gave me one of those parent looks that said he knew exactly what I was doing and disapproved. He quickly finished the explanation and moved on. I can't key you into the seals around my office on this short of notice, but you're perfectly capable of creating security seals wherever you choose to set up your central command. I would suggest finding an entirely new place for safety. If you want, you can use the academy since school has been suspended, but I don't recommend being so far away from the village walls considering the limited speed of genin. You know, or at least you should know, the hospital procedures. I only want you dealing with shinobi and their collateral. You don't have enough energy to help every unfortunate civilian you cross. I was about to protest that I could do whatever I liked when something in his tone sounded strange. What are you talking about? I asked warily. Don't play dumb with me. I know about how you mess with the civilian doctors, and I've received dozens of complaints about it. I never said anything, because it isn't malicious, but you need to conserve your energy in case of emergencies. I have the QB. The QB is not a cure-all, Uzumaki-kun. The entire village, including the civilians, can sense you when you access its chakra outside of my office or the underground room you're familiar with. So? The Hokage studied me. You are not trained in sensing, are you? I can sense, just not very well. If I use the QB, it multiplies that ability as well as allows you to sense negative emotion. Yes, Mio-sama told me about that trait. My point is that you don't seem to understand just how potent the QB's chakra is. I shifted awkwardly. It doesn't hurt anyone unless they touch it. He sighed. Let me put it this way, do you remember the first time you came in contact with the QB's chakra? Frowning, I thought back. What does that have to do with anything? What was it like? I hope that was a rhetorical question. I tended to do my very best to just avoid the memory of the ceiling. The fact that I felt all around awful dulled the actual experience, but it was worse in hindsight. I remembered how toxic the chakra was and how it burned through my body seeking an escape from the seal. It had raged and burned and I couldn't get away. You remember the ceiling, don't you? And are you aware of how dense the QB's chakra is and how much you're containing? He had a point, but it's not like I would ever admit it. I had been used to ninjutsu fights with Sakumo that would saturate the air around the training ground with chakra. It was probably why I never lost consciousness during the sealing. Anyone without that kind of tolerance would be extremely susceptible. Both you and your sister had above-average chakra levels when you arrived here, even though she had quite a bit more, which was one of the reasons she was our first choice as Jinchuriki. By normal standards, you shouldn't have been able to master the control necessary in order to become a medic. In fact, you were meant to become a ninjutsu specialist, which is why I assigned Hatake-san as your sensei. So you weren't only manipulating my head, but my abilities as well. Every academy student is assessed physically and mentally, then placed with jonin who best suit their skill set. You were just placed early. Sakumo didn't teach me ninjutsu for over a year. For the first few months, it was the plan to wait until you dropped out of the medic program of your own free will, but obviously it didn't work, especially when you showed incredible talent, perhaps instinct, in diagnosis and developing effective solutions. I was technically cheating with general knowledge from my world. The Hokage's decision to send me, a very, very fresh genin, on a B rank for my first mission suddenly made a bit more sense. Solutions that were not taught and you shouldn't have known, such as how to make a proper splint at age 7, even though, according to your sister, you had never even met someone with a broken bone, or if you had, you weren't old enough to remember how to treat it. Or, was a Boy Scout. I shrugged. It made sense. The girl's arm was crooked, so it was obviously broken and wasn't supposed to be like that, so I put something to make sure it wouldn't bend anymore. It was common sense. I suppose it's also common sense that in the body there is not only a system of pathways for blood, another for chakra, and third, previously unknown, system of fluid that specifically fights poisons. Yes, I stated sarcastically. My forehead burned a little at the near lie, but I ignored it. The Hokage hummed. And I suppose the existence of a secret military in the village, whom you've had no contact with, officially or unofficially, was common sense as well. I didn't think it actually existed, I muttered. But you still knew about it. How? I chewed on my bottom lip and looked up at the ceiling, trying to come up with a suitable response. I want you to think about your answer to that while I'm gone. For now, I need to know any and all information you have pertaining to this war. I don't have any. I didn't even see the Sandaime move. 1 second, he was on the other side of the table, and in the next instant, the air was so thick with killing intent I could barely breathe, much less move. Not that I would dare move. He stood behind me with a fistful of my hair and a paper-thin blade in my neck between my artery and trachea. Any movement would sever one or the other. If I waited too long, the pulse of blood would saw through the artery. Reflexively, I started to reach for the blade, but his hand tightened in my hair. I closed my eyes, trembling like the ribbons people tied to the grates of fans. Before I properly registered the situation, the Sandaime released me, the killing intent fading. As soon as he released me, I sank to my knees and pressed a hand against my throat, a thin line of blood dribbling down. Belatedly, I realized I was crying as well. I wiped my face and smoothed my hair, struggling to regain my composure. I tried to heal my neck, but my hands shook too violently and my chakra was still out of control. There was a loud crash and I jolted backwards at the table tipped precariously. The sandaime had kicked a leg of the table off and it crashed against the wall 60 feet away. I scrambled backwards so the papers didn't fall on top of me. It didn't take me long to calm down and climb back to my feet. What the hell was that all about? I snapped. Danzo has been working with someone and before he returns, I need to figure out who it is. And you thought it was me? I asked, incredulous. There was a significant chance. You could have just asked. What subterfuge is next? You're just a Chunin, Uzumaki-kun, and you already know much more than you should. You're too smart for your own good. Scowling, I retorted, fine, but almost every time I've been given a direct plan without a corresponding mission, it's been a front for something else. How do I know you're screwing with my head again? The sandaime pulled a mission scroll out of his pocket and handed it to me. I opened it. Team Leader, Uzumaki Kichiro 007309. Teammates, not applicable. Clearance level, 007309 full disclosure. Rank, A. Type, Village Services, Leadership. Mission Summary, lead the village in the absence of the Hokage. Duration, indefinite. Issued by, Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage. Straight face. Underneath the Hokage's signature was a strange seal. I ignored it and focused on the first thing that caught my attention. Full disclosure? I asked dubiously. That's higher than most jonin. He tapped my forehead with his knuckles even as I flinched away. I may not trust you as a person, but I can fully trust you as a shinobi. I'm flattered. I rolled my eyes. Your summary is pretty spare. He didn't respond and almost absently, he walked over and retrieved the table leg he kicked off and propped it back underneath so the thing didn't tip. I sealed the mission scroll inside of my pocket as the Genin shinobi began to file in for the meeting. Slightly apprehensive, I kept my back to the rest of the auditorium. Take a seat, everybody, the Hokage called out to them. They started to take seats. Do you have any questions so far? He addressed me. Not as of yet. Right. He picked up the scrolls from the podium and handed them to me. I took them and slipped them into the pouch on my back. These meetings are scheduled 10 minutes before each shift begins and you will announce who will take the next shift at each one. This meeting is scheduled early, for obvious reasons. The Hokage picked up the podium and brought it to the front of the raised platform. One could call it a stage, but there was no curtain. I turned around and stood at attention just off the Hokage's left shoulder. Technically, there were only procedures for standing at funerals and before the daimyo, but I still stood with my feet together and my hands at my sides, just like I was taught in the army. Old habits die hard. Without further ado, the Hokage began the meeting. Chapter 22. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for arriving on time, the Hokage greeted pointedly as a team of 3 walked in just as he started speaking. They had the decency to look apologetic. I'm sure you've all heard the rumors of how the war is going. I hope you've noticed that 95% of the shinobi and kunoichi in the village are genin. I'm here to clarify as much as possible. I will be perfectly straight with you. There is a significant chance that Konoha will lose this war. Mutterings erupted. But we beat Suna and Kumo. Someone shouted out. Yes, we defeated them, but at great cost to ourselves. Konoha is stronger than any other village. A particularly young kunoichi leapt to her feet and shouted above the din. Agreement echoed around the hall. The Hokage raised a hand for silence. We also have a decent chance at winning this war, but that will never happen without your full cooperation. While all of you are not on the war front, you play a very important role, protecting this village and making sure that the will of fire burns brightly, fueling those in every role of this village." Deafening cheers answered him. He was a good orator, but nothing like Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill, or Martin Luther King Jr. Frankly, with the will of fire propaganda, I couldn't help but subconsciously parallel him with the early pre-Holocaust Hitler. I quickly squashed that thought before I started scowling and noticing more similarities. "You're not the only shinobi of this village, and right now, others need my personal help more than you." The room went dead silent. I surveyed the heads of those assembled. Over 3/4 of those assembled were younger than 15. Those closer to adulthood looked horrified at the announcement. The younger groups were just confused and apprehensive. In my absence, I will be placing Uzumaki Kichiro in charge. "He's just a little kid," one teenager exclaimed, outraged. I was about to respond when I thought better of it. "He's one of our best medics," the Hokage responded, "and is the most qualified person in this village. He's the spirit." The kunoichi from before shouted at the teenager. The teen could probably have squashed her under his little finger. "He can fix anything." "What?" The room exploded in arguments. "Silence!" the Hokage roared. "You are all shinobi of the leaf. I expect you to act like it." They quieted. "Thank you." Now, Uzumaki-kun has been briefed on his responsibilities and I have given him absolute authority until my return. To subvert him is the equivalent of directly disobeying me and you will be disciplined accordingly. Am I clear? When everyone had grudgingly acknowledged the order, he continued. "Thank you. Are there any questions for me? How long will you be gone?" "Indefinitely." "Anyone else?" No one spoke up. "Uzumaki-kun, introduce yourself." I took a step forward and did my best to project my voice throughout the entire room. "Hi, you already know my name, so just call me Kichiro. Just do your job and I'll do mine and we won't have a problem. Any questions? Are you related to the Shodai's wife?" Someone from the back asked. Not the question I was expecting, but yes, I am, though I'm not sure how closely. Next. Is it true you can heal any poison? No, some poisons act too quickly to be countered. Did you raise people from the dead in IWA? What? No way, that's just asking for trouble. So you can raise people from the dead? Where are these questions coming from? Can you? Well, I technically could. The Nidame's Edo Tensei was in the Uzumaki library and out of curiosity, I had looked at it and could most likely perform it, but I sure as hell wouldn't try or even admit to it. Different question, please. Are you the Kyuubi? One of the chunin leaning against the wall asked. No, do I look like a giant fox with more tails than should be possible? That's what the Kyuubi would say. One of the younger genin exclaimed. Actually, the Kyuubi would have killed you for asking in the first place. More than a few people flinched back at the comment. I would have killed the whole lot of them before they even said a word, just for being pathetic weaklings. You need to be nicer. Some people can't help being weak and a good majority of them are children. You're a child, and you could wipe the floor with all of them. I have superior resources at my disposal. Are there any other questions? What happens if we think you're making a bad decision? Someone in the front row asked. By the boy's pale eyes, he was obviously a Hyuga and couldn't have been older than 7. Finally, a relevant question. If you disagree, politely tell me why and I will take your point of view into consideration. Considering Sakumo put up with my backtalk, it was only fair that I put up with theirs. Any more questions? When no one spoke, the Hokage filled the silence. Good job, Uzumaki-kun, he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear before turning to the rest of the room. If that is all, I will be leaving now. Uzumaki-kun will take over from here. He vanished dramatically. Who's up next for village guard? Someone asked from the center of the room. I pulled the schedule out of my pouch. Group 2, I announced and replaced the scroll. There is an abandoned building on the main street about 4 blocks into the village generally used for Jonin assassination training. Once I disable the traps, you'll report there. Any questions? How do you know about a Jonin training site? I shifted, slightly uncomfortable. I was trying to figure out where my sensei lived and he accidentally led me into the middle of an ANBU practice operation. I could feel the reevaluation of my skill level. Are there any objections? How do we know you're not asking us to walk into a death trap? If it is, you'll find my dead body in the morning. I rolled my eyes. If that's all, Group 2 needs to leave for their shift. Wait! Someone burst through the doors as everyone began to stand up. The daimyo is about to reach the village gates. The Hokage's abrupt departure suddenly made more sense. I'll take care of it. Everyone should have an idea of what they're supposed to be doing. I literally bounced off the walls to get to the door and swung out in an acrobatic swing that would have even the best stunt artists and circus performers green with envy. As soon as I was clear, I attempted a shunshin that landed me just shy of a block away from the main gate. I raced over the rooftops and leapt down, just as the daimyo and his modest entourage reached the village gates. I shifted my forehead protector nervously to make sure it fully covered the seal on my forehead before marching up to the gates where a flustered genin was staring at the papers he had been handed. The daimyo slowly stepped out of the carriage he rode in. The entourage marched into the village as the genin handed the papers back and waved them inside the village. "Where's your Hokage?" he demanded loudly as the genin started to gather to stare. "He has left to fight." "I am currently the shinobi in charge here," I said firmly. He focused on me. "I don't appreciate games, little boy. Where is your Hokage?" "With all due respect, Daimyo-sama, Sandaime-sama is on his way to fight. I assure you, I am in charge. My comrades here will back up my claim." I reached into my pouch and pulled out the scroll I was instructed to give him. "I was instructed to give you this." I took a step forward and the 3 guards, who looked to have samurai training, blocked my path when the daimyo inclined his head. One held out a hand for the scroll. I raised an eyebrow at them before leaping up and flipping over them to hand the scroll directly to the daimyo. Normally, I wouldn't have had any problem with letting them pass on the scroll, but if I was understanding the seal, it would set off a nasty genjutsu if opened by anyone else. I figured protecting the daimyo from his own idiocy was part of the be nice order. He looked down his nose at me and took the scroll, opening it warily. "What's your name, boy?" "Uzumaki Kichiro." His nose crinkled in disgust. "You and your clan are better off dead." One eavesdropping academy student loudly protested that statement with plenty of unflattering adjectives. Then lunged for the daimyo. I intercepted him with depressing ease. He was at least 3 years younger than me. "Say that to my face, old coot. My grandmother was an Uzumaki and she was the best person ever." "Say it again and I clamped a hand over his mouth. "Nawaki-san, please calm down," I requested politely. He tried once to jerk out of my grip before going still and licking my hand. It was a disturbing sensation, but I didn't release him. I bent down and murmured in his ear, "Thank you. I'm sure the hospital could use some help and it would make your sister very proud that you went to help out in your free time. I promise I won't tell anyone I suggested it, okay?" He tried to bite down on my fingers. I dug my fingers in his wrist hard enough that his eyes started to water. "I'm not asking. That's the daimyo you're threatening, and if you don't do as I say this instant, he can order your execution and both you and I will be in serious trouble, because I'll be forced to defend you and defy him. You are the Senju heir, act like it. Leave now and do not look back." I released him, and after sending the daimyo a dirty look, Nawaki stomped off. Where are you going, boy? You have yet to face your punishment for your disrespect. The genin watching, as well the rest of the academy students watching, closed ranks behind me. Daimyo-sama, I advise you to read the message from Hokage-sama before you continue towards your current goal. With a glare, he ripped open the scroll, and his scowl grew progressively harsher as he continued reading. At the end, he rolled it up with more dignity than I expected him to manage. I need to talk to you in private about the operations of this village, boy. I nodded once and turned to the genin behind me, who were decidedly not happy with the daimyo, and several crossed their arms angrily when they realized I was about to order them off. I was touched that they thought I was worth defending, but at the same time, I was a little insulted that they thought I needed it. Those of you in the academy, I'm sure you can find tasks to do for your parents or clan. Orphans, the hospital always has need of people to do some heavy lifting. You have no excuse for goofing off while the chunin teachers are fighting. Genin, I know some of you should be on shift, and those who just got off should head home for some rest. Those of you without tasks can head to their genin training grounds and practice their chakra control. I am not asking, I am ordering. For a long minute, I thought they would refuse, but they scattered. This way, Daimyo-sama, the academy has an empty room we can use. He tried to lead the way instead. If I was anyone else, or if I appeared older, I would have taken offense to that, but I quite enjoyed sticking him and his cronies with a genjutsu that made them think they were leading, while in reality, I was walking ahead of them and periodically waiting for them to catch up. Slowly, I released the genjutsu as we entered the academy and pointed out a suitable classroom. An utterly plain-looking chunin took up a position just off my left shoulder, shadowing my steps as everyone filed in, and I sealed the room from listeners with one of Kushina's seals. I checked his chakra signature and recognized him as one of the ANBU, Rat. This is nothing more than a schoolroom. The daimyo scoffed. Unfortunately, I do not have access to the Hokage's office, nor have I made my own just yet. What are the status of your troops? Fit. Don't play games with me, boy. How many shinobi are in this village? That is not information I am allowed to give. Where has the Hokage gone? To fight. You fool! He roared at me. To what location is the Hokage going to fight at? That is not information I am allowed to give. You are incompetent. With all due respect, sir, I have a higher clearance level than you in matters pertaining to this military. I do not withhold information out of spite, but in order to maintain competition with the other nations. I am the leader of this land. I order you to tell me what I want to know. In the interest of preserving your leadership, I have to deny your request and remind you that you and your guards are civilians, thus your ability to protect information is severely limited. You, kill him, the daimyo ordered the disguised ANBU standing behind me. He slowly reached into the pouch on his hip, and I struggled to remain relaxed. He pulled out a brand new bingo book and flipped through the pages until he landed on mine, then held it out for the daimyo to see. This is the person you are ordering the death of. The daimyo paled. I held back a frown. My entry couldn't have been that impressive. Rat pulled it back and flashed me the entry. I was wanted alive by all the nations with Biju and several without. I was now considered a B-rank threat, even though my only known abilities were unknown mastery of Uzumaki Fuinjutsu and complete mastery of Iryo Ninjutsu. I had an impressive list of known associates. The bounty was quite small in comparison to Sakumo or Dan, but it was still a sum worth taking note. You're the spirit of the triage? Yes. You're the best medic in the 5 nations. There's really no way to determine that. Now, I have work I need to do as well as family to take care of, so unless there's anything else, I'll take my leave. You are far too young for this to be true. In the shinobi world, age is a hallmark of experience, not skill or strength. I turned my back on the daimyo and stared out the window, outside of which 3 academy students trained. One was repeating katas and the other two were engaged in the shinobi version of tag with dull kunai, moving at speeds civilians would have a hard time tracking. Who's your teacher? Hatake Sakumo, Konoha's white fan. And the Hokage left you in charge of this village even though you are a child. I have the intelligence and maturity to lead. Unless the civilian sect of this village crosses my leadership, they will operate independently and you can take complete control, if you wish. My focus is on taking care of the people directly under my jurisdiction, no more, no less. I could feel the daimyo's eyes on my back and wished I was dealing with regular people-pleasing politicians, not power-hungry, wannabe dictators. As long as you don't interfere, we can avoid each other completely. Is that agreeable to you? He contemplated the offer. What about my protection? I can assign you 2 genin, you can trail after me while I do my job, or I can use Fuinjutsu to create a room no one can enter without authorization. Fuinjutsu. Very well, notify me when you have chosen the quarters you wish to sleep in, and I will place the seals. Will that be all? Yes. I turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. The Uzumaki clan now resides in Konoha, I told him pleasantly. There are 7 children being raised in the clan house, and if you touch them or their caretakers, directly or not, your life is forfeit, it doesn't matter who you are. I marched out without looking back. Rat followed me. When the door closed, a boy slightly older than me raised out of his hiding spot as the hinge faded to reveal one of the ANBU. I quickly confirmed the chakra signature before the boy raised off after a few murmured words. Good job, kid, you did better than expected in there, Rat told me, then disappeared. I rolled my eyes and marched out of the building, took to the rooftops, and landed in front of the hospital. Minato sat in a corner of the waiting room, tossing a kunai up in the air and catching it by the ring of the handle. I stayed just outside of Minato's sensing range as I slid behind the receptionist's desk where a harried civilian woman appeared close to tears as she tried to decipher the code of the chunin who normally man the desk. You don't have to worry about that log, it's in shinobi code and it logs jonin and ANBU injuries. I'm taking care of all of that already. I closed the log and climbed up to the top shelf of the records and stuck it on top. Thank Cammy, I thought I was going insane. Just take care of the stuff you were taught. I wasn't taught anything. She all but wailed. They just told me to take care of this desk and I'm just a trainee nurse. I don't know all of this record stuff. I don't even know how to pull files. Hey, it's fine. All you have to do is write down the names of the injured on this log here, the sick on this one, and the appointments on this one. Thank you, Shinobi-san. She gushed. You're welcome. The files are organized just like the library. Give it a few days and you'll have it down to pat. I shuffled back to the massive wall of files and fingered through until I found Minato's. Mentally, he was declared clear, which was more than I expected, but the standards were extremely low. He was still injured, so he was restricted to light duty. You look a little young to be a doctor, Shinobi-san. I'm not, I'm a medic mean. You look like a genin. I turned around and tapped my vest. Chunin. I turned back to the wall to replace Minato's file. Does the Haori mean something? I've never seen the other medic nin wear it. It makes the enemy nin think twice about attacking me. You're just a little kid. In the shinobi world, age is a hallmark of experience, not skill, I repeated. You're not very talkative. I'm actually in charge while the Hokage's gone, so I'm quite busy. I don't mean to be rude, but I have work to do and I can't stop and chat. I escaped out before she could say anything more and hurried towards the interview room where I figured Kushina would be testing. I crept into the observation room. She sat in one of the metal chairs, fidgeting with her shoe and answering the doctor's questions. She never made eye contact with the doctor. I couldn't hear the questions, but Kushina never seemed to get upset, so I figured everything was mostly okay. After a few minutes of watching, I left and went back to the waiting room, letting Minato pick up on my chakra signature. He brightened and waved at me as I opened the door to the rest of the hospital. I motioned him over, just as Kushina skipped down the hall. I passed. She cheered and slammed into me with a violent hug. I'm clear for full duty. I didn't expect that, but I guessed it was a pleasant surprise. Good for you, Kushina. Any restrictions? None. She chirped. Okay, Minato? I knew the answer, but I was curious to see if he would share. I'm cleared, but still injured, he murmured, staring at my feet. Okay. At 0150 there's a meeting in the Academy auditorium. I'll figure out what you'll do then. Get some rest and I'll meet you then, okay? Kushina pulled Minato into the hug. In my old world, I wasn't the most touchy-feely person, but after the last week of spending almost every waking hour with two orphans starved for attention, I had no choice in the matter, especially when they both initiated random hug sessions whether I consented or not. I noted that the society was quite devoid of physical contact. I had never been a proponent of hugs fix everything, but I was sure they could help a lot more than I originally thought. Guys, I have work to do. You really are in charge, aren't you, Nissan? Minato asked. Yes, I am. We didn't eat dinner, Kushina mumbled. I'm sure there's still 1 or 2 shops open. Will you come? Sorry, Kushina, I really have to go. Do what? Minato challenged. I have to clear a house of traps and set up a headquarters. Where? Minato, I warned. Where? Kushina echoed. Both of them tightened their grip on me. Someplace too dangerous for the two of you. I'll see you at the meeting. I detached myself from them and marched out, feeling like a bit of a jerk. That's the end of this tale for now. If you enjoyed, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you really enjoyed it. Give props to the author in the pinned comment and check out my other stories here. Peace.